1. The night's first breath. The room is hushed as if the world has drawn its curtains. Somewhere outside, the wind moves gently through the trees, and the leaves answer with a soft, papery whisper. I breathe in, and the air feels like warm tea in my chest. The day's noise is far away now, like a train that has long since passed, leaving only the faint memory of its sound. In this stillness, I remember how my mother used to linger at the edge of my bed, pulling the blanket up beneath my chin, her hands careful, as if she were tucking in not just a child, but a dream. The night feels a little like that now, holding me gently and telling me without words, it's time to rest. 2. A thread between us. I think of my mother as a seamstress of invisible things. Not cloth, but moments, stitched together quietly when no one was looking. Her care was never loud. It was a steady thread, looping through my life, binding the days in ways I could not see at the time. I didn't understand then that love can be a kind of patience, a willingness to keep showing up, even when the fabric frays, even when the needle pricks your own skin. Now, with the years folded behind me, I can trace those stitches. I see how they held me, even when I thought I was standing on my own. 3. The language we missed. There are so many ways two people can speak to each other without truly hearing. I didn't know that when I was young. I thought language was only made of words, syllables wrapped in sound, spoken and heard, understood or misunderstood. My mother spoke a different dialect, one without punctuation marks or neat sentences. Her words came in the form of actions so small they often slipped past my younger eyes. The tea she brewed before the sun rose, even when she was the only one awake. The way she would check the front door twice before bed, even though she had already locked it. Her quiet way of making sure the world stayed safe for those sleeping under her roof. The light left on in the hallway, not because she needed it, but because she knew I was afraid of the dark. I wish I had known then that every small, invisible thing was a kind of letter she was writing to me. A letter I didn't read until years later, when time slowed me down enough to notice. When I was a teenager, I mistook her silences for distance. She wasn't one to fill a room with chatter. She didn't gush over my small accomplishments the way my friends' mothers seemed to. When I asked for advice, she sometimes paused so long before answering that I assumed she didn't care. But now I see she was weighing her words, trying to give me the truest thing she could. We had entire conversations in the spaces between words. Back then, they felt like empty pauses. Now, I think they were bridges, delicate and quiet, but bridges just the same. I remember one evening in particular. I had come home late from a friend's house. The sky was already heavy with night, and the street lamps were the only thing marking the way. When I walked through the door, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table. She didn't ask where I had been. She didn't raise her voice or scold. She simply slid a bowl of soup across the table toward me. The steam curled up into my face, carrying the smell of ginger and scallions. It wasn't just food. It was her way of saying, "You're safe now. I've been waiting for you. Eat and let the day fall away." I don't remember if we spoke that night, but I remember the soup. I remember the warmth in my chest. I remember feeling held, even though no arms were around me. It's strange, isn't it? How the most profound love sometimes hides in the smallest gestures. How the sentences we remember most clearly aren't spoken at all. In my 20s, I began to travel far from home. Phone calls became our main thread of connection. She would always start by asking if I'd eaten, as though nourishment was the foundation of every conversation. I used to laugh at that, thinking it was such a simple, almost trivial question. Now, I hear it differently. What she really meant was, are you taking care of yourself? Are you remembering that you are worth caring for? We didn't always understand each other, and I don't mean just our words. We sometimes missed the intent, the tone, the meaning hidden behind the moment. But the older I get, the more I realize we were speaking the same language all along. I just didn't know how to listen. I think about this often now, the ways I must have missed her entirely, standing right in front of her. She was a book written in a font I couldn't yet read, and I kept skipping to the end, impatient to know the ending, instead of taking the time to move through her story page by page. Now, when I remember her, the way her hands would find work even in stillness, the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was looking, I realize I am still reading, still finding footnotes in moments I thought I had long since finished with. If I could step back into those years, I would try to answer her in her own language. I would pour her tea before she could ask. I would fix the loose hinge on the cabinet she kept meaning to get to. I would fold her laundry and make sure the towels were still warm when she used them. Not as repayment, love doesn't tally debts, but simply as recognition, as a way of saying, I hear you now. I see what you've been telling me all along. Sometimes, as I lie in bed at night, I imagine we are sitting at the kitchen table again. The kettle whistles softly. There's the scent of tea leaves opening in the steam. We don't rush to fill the silence. We just sit there, letting the warmth rise between us, letting the quiet say everything. And I wonder, perhaps the language we missed wasn't missed at all. Perhaps it was always there, woven into the rhythm of our days, waiting patiently for me to grow still enough to finally understand. Number 4, younger eyes. When I think back on the way I saw my mother in those early years, it's almost like looking at an old photograph, one where the focus isn't quite right. The edges are sharp in places, but the heart of the picture is blurred. Through younger eyes, I read the world with urgency. I was quick to decide what things meant, quick to fill in the spaces with my own answers. If she was quiet, I decided she was disappointed. If she didn't laugh at my story, I thought she wasn't listening. If she didn't say the words I wanted to hear, I assumed she didn't feel them. Children believe what they see, and what I saw was a woman who didn't speak her feelings in grand declarations. I didn't yet understand that not everyone writes their love in bold letters across the sky. Some people, like her, write it in the soil, where it takes time to grow, where the roots run deep and hidden. I remember afternoons when I would storm off to my room, convinced she had ignored me. I would close the door, turn my music up just loud enough to drown out my thoughts, and lie on my bed staring at the ceiling. Only years later did I realize that while I was sulking in my room, she was in the kitchen cutting fruit, leaving a plate outside my door. Her silent offering, her way of saying, I'm still here when you're ready. I didn't always take the plate. Sometimes I left it untouched out of stubborn pride. I think about that now, and it stings in a quiet, private way. The way an old scar aches when the weather changes. She kept leaving those plates anyway. Younger eyes couldn't see that consistency like that is its own kind of vow. In those years, I thought love was supposed to feel like fireworks. I expected bright colors, loud celebrations, grand gestures. What my mother gave me instead was something softer, a kind of steady lamp that never went out, even when I wasn't looking. But back then, that light seemed too dim to notice. I didn't yet understand that the brightest light isn't always the one that burns fast and hot. It's the one that stays lit through the night. Her silences were the hardest for me to read. I filled them with my own fears. If I had done well at something and she only nodded with a faint smile, I assumed she wasn't proud. If I had failed and she didn't rush to comfort me, I thought she didn't care. Now I know that her nod was pride without condition, that her quiet presence beside me in hard times was a way of saying, I trust you to find your own way through. It takes a different kind of strength to resist fixing everything for someone you love. Younger eyes can't see that kind of strength. They want immediate reassurance, not the long, slow trust of a steady hand nearby. I can still picture her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, hands deep in the earth, her back curved under the sun. She didn't call for me to join her, but she always left space beside her in the rows. She never told me what she was planting, but when the season turned, there would be flowers or vegetables or herbs, things that had quietly been growing while I was busy with other parts of my life. That was her way with me too. She planted things, values, resilience, patience, and waited for them to grow in their own time. I wish I had known sooner how much of love is invisible in its first stages. I might have been less quick to judge, less quick to feel slighted. But younger eyes are impatient. They want blossoms without waiting for the root to take hold. As I got older, I began to realize that she saw me more clearly than I saw her. She could tell when my laughter was covering something. She could sense the moments I was holding back tears. She didn't always address it directly. Sometimes she just made my favorite meal, or left the porch light on until I came home, or lingered in the hallway after I passed by, as if to be sure I was really all right. And yet, I still misunderstood her. I mistook her restraint for emotional distance, her quiet for indifference. The truth, I think, is that she was giving me space because she knew I would need it to grow into myself. Now, when I look back, I see how much of her love was a kind of discipline, not in the way of punishment, but in the way of tending something gently without smothering it. She could have told me what to do, but she wanted me to learn how to decide for myself. She could have held me tighter, but she wanted me to learn how to stand on my own. It's strange to think that the very things I resented when I was younger are the things I'm most grateful for now. The gaps I thought were neglect were actually space in which I learned who I was. I sometimes wonder what it would be like if I could meet her now, both of us as adults. Would we talk differently? Would I recognize her language right away without needing years to translate it? I think we would sit together more. I think I would let the silences stretch without rushing to fill them. I think I would look into her eyes and see not just my mother, but a woman who had lived a whole life before I even arrived. A life I knew almost nothing about. Younger eyes couldn't see her whole story. They could only see the part where she was mother. But now, with older eyes, I can look back and realize that she was always more than that, and that loving her fully means seeing all the chapters, not just the ones where I was present. If there is one thing I wish I could tell that younger version of myself, it would be this. Wait, look longer, listen deeper. One day you'll see her clearly. One day you'll understand. The season of understanding. There comes a moment in life, not marked on any calendar, when the air feels different. The light falls in a way you can't quite name, and you realize that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, you've crossed into a new season. For me, that season arrived quietly. There was no grand event to announce it, no sudden revelation. Just an ordinary afternoon, my hands tired from work, my mind weary from the weight of too many days strung together. I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I thought, I understand why she was so tired. It startled me, that thought, because for years I had believed my mother's weariness was a choice, as if she simply didn't try hard enough to be joyful. But sitting there, with the bones in my hands aching and the world demanding more than I had to give, I realized how wrong I had been. It wasn't just work that wore her down. It was the endless tending to things that never stayed done. The meals cooked, the floors swept, the bills paid, the invisible labor of keeping everyone's life stitched together. It was a marathon without a finish line, and she had run it every day without applause. The season of understanding is not always kind when it arrives. It asks you to look back with new eyes, older eyes, and to see the places where you were unfair, the moments you judged without knowing the full weight she carried. It asks you to feel the ache she must have felt, and to admit that you once mistook her endurance for distance. In my own life, I began to carry burdens that no one could see. I learned what it was to wake in the middle of the night with worries that had no clear solution. I learned the way your body remembers exhaustion, how it settles into your muscles and makes a home there. And suddenly, I could picture her, standing at the sink after everyone had gone to bed, her hands in warm water, her eyes fixed not on the dishes, but on something far away, some private thought she never spoke aloud. When you're young, you think love is the big moments. Birthdays, celebrations, words spoken in the heat of feeling. But in this season, I began to understand that love is also in the quiet, in the keeping, in the choosing, to show up every day for people who may not notice you're doing it. I remembered the mornings when she rose before the sun. I used to think it was because she liked mornings. Now I wonder if she simply needed that one pocket of stillness before the day began making demands of her. I know now what it is to crave a few minutes that belong only to you. And I began to see something else, the patience it takes to let someone grow without rushing them. How she must have held her tongue at times, wanting to tell me the answer, but letting me find it on my own because she knew I'd learn it better that way. I thought she was withholding. She was, in fact, giving me the rare gift of trust. Understanding her did not come in a single flash of insight. It came like spring thaw, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you notice that the ground is soft again, and something new is beginning to grow. I began to forgive her for the things I once thought were flaws. Her quietness was not a lack of love, it was the way she made space for others to speak. Her moments of distraction were not a sign that I wasn't important. They were the weight of 1,000 small responsibilities pressing on her mind. Even her occasional sharpness was not cruelty. It was fatigue, the kind that seeps in when you've been too strong for too long. With this understanding came a gentler kind of grief. The grief of knowing that for so many years I had seen her only in pieces, never as the whole, complex woman she was. And also the grief of knowing there would never be enough time to tell her that I finally understood. But alongside that grief was something softer still: gratitude. Gratitude for her endurance, for her unshaken presence, for the ways she kept the roof over my head and the floor under my feet, even when I didn't notice. Gratitude for the parts of her I carry in me now, the parts that know how to keep going when I am tired, how to love without demanding recognition, how to find beauty in small, quiet things. The season of understanding is humbling. It doesn't just change how you see the past, it changes how you move through the present. I started speaking more softly. I started checking in on people without waiting for them to ask. I started cooking meals not just to feed hunger, but to wrap comfort around someone the way she used to wrap it around me. And perhaps most importantly, I began to see myself not just as a child of my mother, but as a mirror of her, shaped by her ways, even in the years when I thought I was nothing like her. The air in this season feels different. It carries a stillness, a patience. It asks nothing but that you keep your eyes open to the quiet work of love all around you. It teaches you that understanding, like love, is not a destination, it's a practice. Something you keep returning to over and over in small, steady ways. And now, when I think of her, whether she is near or far, living or only in memory, I send her my thanks in the same language she once used with me. In the quiet, in the keeping, in the choosing to love without needing to be seen. Number 6. Small, unnoticed things. It's the little things that come back to me now. Not the grand events or the headline moments, but the details so ordinary I once stepped over them without a second thought. The way she folded laundry, not just to make it tidy, but to make it gentle. So that when I pulled a shirt over my head, it carried the faint warmth of the sunlit afternoon when she had hung it out to dry. The way she'd pair my socks carefully, lining the edges just so, as if they were small companions that should never be separated. I used to think these things were just habits. Now I know they were her love, disguised as routine. There was the kitchen window, always her favorite spot in the house. She would stand there in the evenings, hands resting on the counter, eyes drifting beyond the glass. Sometimes she would hum, so softly I wasn't sure if the sound was hers or the wind outside. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, but I think the stillness there gave her a moment to breathe, to exist without having to tend to anyone else. She never told me what she saw out that window. Maybe the shifting colors of the sky, or the neighbors passing by, or memories from years before I was born. Whatever it was, it must have been a kind of comfort, because she returned to that spot day after day. I think of her hands often. Not in the way they looked, though I remember the faint freckles, the half-moons of flour dust when she baked, but in the way they moved. They were never still unless she was asleep, always folding, stirring, mending, straightening, not out of restlessness, but out of some quiet promise she seemed to keep with herself, that the world, or at least our little corner of it, would be cared for. And then there was the way she prepared the table. It didn't matter if it was an ordinary Tuesday dinner or a birthday meal. She placed each dish with the same care, as though the act of eating together was its own small ceremony. She'd fold the napkins in half, set the silverware parallel and even, and make sure the bread was warm before it reached the table. She never called it special. But I see now that she treated every gathering as worth honoring. I think of rainy days. How she would drape towels near the door for our wet shoes. How she'd light a single lamp in the living room, its golden glow making the whole house feel like it was holding its breath. She didn't need to announce that we were safe, or that it was good to be home. The light and the warmth did the talking. There were also the quiet checks she made when she thought no one noticed. The way she'd touch the thermostat before bed, not to save money, but to be sure we wouldn't wake up shivering. The way she'd peek into my room late at night, her footsteps soft, just long enough to see that my chest was still rising and falling. These are not the kinds of moments you notice at the time. They happen in the background, woven into the fabric of daily life. But when you look back, they are the threads that hold everything together. When I was younger, I mistook such things for just the way things are, as though folded laundry appeared by itself, as though the table set itself each night, as though the world simply turned in this quiet, orderly way. Now I know better. Now I know these things happened because someone cared enough to make them happen. And in our home, that someone was her. Sometimes, when my own life feels rushed and tangled, I find myself reaching for those same small acts. Folding my laundry with a little more care than necessary. Lighting a lamp on a gray afternoon. Cutting fruit and arranging it neatly on a plate, even if it's just for me. It's not about perfection. It's about creating small, steady anchors in the day, reminders that life doesn't have to be loud to be full. I think she understood that better than anyone. She didn't need to declare her love. She built it into the scaffolding of our everyday lives. Into the way she laid out my school clothes the night before, into the extra blanket at the end of my bed on cold nights, into the little notes she sometimes tucked into my lunch bag, not with long messages, just a heart or a smiley face drawn in pen. The older I get, the more I see how easy it is to overlook the beauty of these unnoticed things. They rarely demand attention. They rarely earn thanks. And yet, they are the shape of love itself. Humble, persistent, woven into the hours like quiet music you can't hear until the rest of the world goes silent. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the weight of a freshly folded towel in my hands. I can still hear the faint clink of dishes as she set the table. I can still see her at that kitchen window, watching the day's last light fade into evening. These memories don't make noise. They don't demand to be remembered. But they are here, resting in the quiet corners of my mind, waiting for me to notice them all over again. And maybe that's what she wanted all along, for me to understand that love is not always a blaze of light, but sometimes the small lamp in the corner, lit every evening without fail, just so you can find your way home. Number 7. The time I saw her cry. I can count on one hand the times I saw my mother cry. Tears didn't seem to belong to her, at least not in the way I understood them then. She was steady, unshaken, like the old oak in our backyard that never bent, no matter how the wind tried to move it. But there was one night, quiet, unremarkable in most ways, when I saw her differently. I was 23, visiting home for a long weekend. It was late, the house dim, except for the soft glow of the kitchen light. I had just returned from meeting friends, still carrying the scent of cold air on my coat. I tried to walk past quietly so as not to wake anyone. But she was there, sitting at the kitchen table alone. Her posture was different that night, shoulders sloped forward, hands resting on a piece of paper in front of her. I thought at first she was reading a letter, but as I stepped closer, I saw it was a bill, a large one. The kind that doesn't politely wait to be paid. She didn't notice me right away. Her gaze was on the paper, but her eyes weren't really moving over the words. They were fixed, as if holding still could keep the problem from growing. And then, so suddenly I almost doubted what I'd seen, her eyes filled with tears. They didn't spill over right away. They clung there, the way rain hesitates on the edge of a leaf before falling. I froze. I had never known what to do with other people's tears, and hers felt almost impossible, like seeing a star fall out of the sky. I thought about saying something. Are you okay? What happened? But the questions felt too small, too clumsy for that moment. She became aware of me then. She blinked, the tears retreating into the corners of her eyes as she straightened in her chair. Her voice was calm, though I could hear the slight catch in it. You're home. A statement, not a question. As if that was enough to shift the air in the room. I didn't press her. I simply walked over and sat down across from her. She didn't explain, and I didn't ask. Instead, I reached for the sugar bowl and stirred a spoon into my tea, matching her silence. We sat there for a long time. We sat the clock ticking softly above us. Her hands eventually moved from the bill to the edge of her mug, cradling it for warmth. The tears were gone by then, But something in her had changed. A looseness, as if my presence, wordless as it was, had given her a place to set the weight down for just a moment. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time I realized that strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means knowing when to let yourself bend, even just enough to keep from snapping. For days after, I replayed the image of her sitting there at the table, that quiet moment of surrender. It unsettled me, but not in the way I expected. I had always believed that seeing her cry would make me feel less safe. Instead, it made me feel closer to her, as though a door had opened into a room I didn't know she had. Looking back now, I think she must have cried far more often than I ever saw. Probably not in front of anyone. Maybe in the car after a long day. Maybe in the shower where no one could hear. And yet, each morning she still rose, made breakfast, folded laundry, paid what she could, and carried on. I didn't need to know what that particular bill meant. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that for one moment, I had seen the weight she carried without disguise. And in that moment, I stopped seeing her only as my mother. I saw her as a woman who had to hold up her own life while holding up the lives of others. Now, when I remember that night, I don't think of it as a breaking point. I think of it as the night I learned that tears can be another way of saying, I'm tired, but I'm still here. And that, in its own way, is a kind of strength I am still learning to carry. 8. Inherited strength. It's a strange thing how the qualities we resist most fiercely in our parents are often the ones we carry forward without even meaning to. For years, I told myself I was different from my mother. I would be louder in my feelings. I would speak my mind without hesitation. I would lean on others instead of always standing on my own. But somewhere along the way, I began to notice the echoes of her in my own movements. It started small. The way I could push through a long day, even when my legs felt heavy, even when the world asked for more than I thought I had to give. The way I kept my voice steady in moments when I was quietly unraveling inside. The way I could carry something alone for a while. Not because I wanted to, but because there was no one else to carry it. It wasn't pride that kept me from asking for help. It was something quieter, a kind of internal promise that I would not let the people I loved feel the weight I was holding. And I recognized that promise. It was hers. When I was younger, I saw her strength as a kind of stubbornness. She rarely asked for help, even when it was clear she could have used it. If she was sick, she would still rise early, make breakfast, and carry on with the day as though nothing was wrong. At the time, I thought it was unnecessary, a refusal to admit she was human. Now I know it was something else entirely. It was a decision, a choice to keep going, even when it would have been easier to stop. Not out of denial, but out of love for those who depended on her. I found myself making the same choice, again and again. I never set out to imitate her, and yet here I am, doing the same quiet math she must have done so many times. I am tired, but if I keep moving, they won't have to feel it. Strength, I've learned, isn't about refusing to bend. It's about knowing when to yield without breaking, when to let the wind move through you instead of trying to stand rigid against it. My mother understood that instinctively. It took me years to catch on. And it isn't just endurance I've inherited from her. It's the way she found small acts of care in the middle of difficulty. If she was overwhelmed, she would still make sure there were fresh flowers on the table. If money was tight, she would still find a way to bake something sweet for the weekend. Her strength wasn't about pushing through without feeling. It was about creating pockets of softness, even when the world around her was hard. I see that in myself now, in the way I light a candle at the end of a long day, or take the time to cook a proper meal, even if it's just for me. It's a way of saying to the people around me, and to myself, we're still here. We still deserve a little beauty. There's another part of her strength I carry, though it's harder to speak about. The ability to forgive without needing an apology. She did that more times than I probably know. When I was young and quick to speak out of frustration, she didn't hold it against me. When others disappointed her, she simply adjusted her expectations quietly, without bitterness. That kind of forgiveness isn't loud or performative. It's a quiet release, an unclenching of the heart. I've tried to practice it, and it feels like a muscle that both aches and grows stronger every time I use it. I think she must have felt the same. It's strange how much I used to resist the idea of being like her. When I was younger, I wanted my own identity to be sharp and separate, as if being different was the only way to be my own person. But now I see that carrying her ways in me doesn't erase who I am. It deepens it. I am not her, and yet I am shaped by her. The way river stones are shaped by the water that runs over them for years. The edges are my own, but the smoothness, that's hers. I think about the night I saw her cry at the kitchen table, the strength it must have taken for her to carry all she did and still show up every morning as though nothing had cracked. I understand now that her strength wasn't in never breaking. It was in breaking quietly and still returning to her life with her hands open. That is the strength I carry forward. Not the invincibility I once imagined, but the resilience to keep going and to keep loving even when life has pressed hard against me. And maybe that's the real inheritance. Not possessions, not traditions, but the quiet endurance that runs like a thread through the generations. A strength that knows when to hold on, when to let go, and how to keep the heart soft enough to love again after it has been bruised. Now, part 9. Letters unwritten. There are so many things I wish I could tell my mother now, not because I never had the chance to speak, but because I never knew the right words until it was too late. If I could, I think I would write her a letter. Or maybe many letters. Not the kind you send through the mail, but the kind you tuck into the quiet corners of your life, hoping somehow they might find their way to her. The first one would be simple. Dear Mom, I see you now. When I was younger, I thought I understood what it meant to love someone. But love, as I've come to know it, is a deeper, quieter thing than I ever imagined. It's not in the grand declarations. It's in the small, unnoticed acts that stitch themselves into the fabric of a day, refilling the sugar jar before it's empty, leaving a light on for someone coming home late, folding laundry without asking who it belongs to. You loved me in ways I didn't have the language for back then. And now I find myself speaking that same language without even trying. Another letter might begin differently. Dear Mom, I'm sorry. Sorry for the times I mistook your silence for distance. Sorry for the years I believed you simply didn't understand me, when the truth was that I didn't understand myself. Sorry for all the sharp words I let slip out, thinking I could take them back later, not realizing they might leave a mark. If I could, I would go back to those small moments, the ones that didn't seem important at the time, and I would choose gentler words. I would pause long enough to see that you were already doing the best you could, even when it didn't look the way I thought it should. And then there are the letters I'd never send, because they would be too hard to read aloud. They would carry the weight of all the things I never asked you about. Your dreams before you became a mother, the hurts you carried quietly, the moments you felt most alone. I didn't ask because I didn't think to. I didn't know that love also means being curious about the life someone had before you arrived in it. By the time I realized, the window to ask had already closed. Sometimes in the stillness before sleep, I imagine you reading my letters. I picture you in a quiet kitchen somewhere, the morning light spilling over your shoulder, your fingers tracing the edges of the paper. You don't rush through them. You read each line as though it matters. And maybe you smile. Not because my words are perfect, but because you finally know that I see you. I think about what you might write back if you could. Maybe your letter would be short, just a single page. You'd tell me there's nothing to forgive. You'd say you always knew I would understand one day. You might even tell me that you, too, wish you had asked your own mother more questions. I have learned that there are many ways to speak to someone, even when they are no longer sitting across from you. Sometimes the words don't need paper or air. They live in the way you move through the world. When I choose kindness over impatience, you are in that choice. When I take a deep breath before speaking, you are in that pause. When I carry on, even when I am tired, you are in that endurance. And so maybe my letters aren't really unwritten after all. Maybe they are simply written in the language of my days, a language you taught me without ever holding a pen. If I could leave you with one final letter, I think it would be this. Dear Mom, thank you. Thank you for the invisible work, for the patience that stretched farther than I ever knew. Thank you for the way you made a life for us, even when I didn't see the cost. Thank you for being my first example of how to love someone, not just when it's easy, but also when it's hard. I will carry these letters in me always. And maybe, somehow, you'll still hear them in the quiet places, in the unspoken spaces between one heartbeat and the next. Number 10, the sound of her voice. Long after someone is gone, their voice can stay with you. Not just the sound of it, but the way it lived in the spaces between words. The pauses, the quiet hum in the back of a sentence, the way their breath seemed to shape the air around them. My mother's voice was not loud. It never needed to be. It had a steadiness to it, like a lantern held in the dark. Not blinding, not commanding, but enough to show you the path a few steps ahead. When I was small, her voice was my map. It told me when it was safe to cross the street, when the day was ending, when something in the oven was ready to come out. But it also spoke in ways that had nothing to do with instructions. She could turn my name into something soft, like a pebble smoothed by water. Even when she said it to get my attention, there was no edge to it. I didn't notice then how rare that is, for a voice to hold both firmness and warmth in equal measure. Now, I hear it more clearly in my memory, and I realize it was never about the exact words she used. It was the way she said them, the way her tone seemed to understand what my heart needed before I even knew myself. There was a certain rhythm to her speaking, a pace that never rushed, even when the day was full. If something mattered, she gave it space. She let it breathe before answering, as though the silence itself was part of her response. And in those pauses, I always felt there was room for me. Room to think, room to change my mind, room to not know the answer yet. Now, as an adult, I find myself chasing that same rhythm. I try to slow my voice when I'm speaking to someone who needs patience. I try to soften my tone when the world has already been too sharp to them. And every time I do, it feels a little like borrowing her voice for a moment. Sometimes I hear her most clearly when I am alone. If I've forgotten where I put something, I'll hear her gentle suggestion in my head. Check the table by the window. If I'm doubting myself, I'll hear her steady reassurance. You've done harder things before. You can do this too. It's not that I think she's actually speaking to me. It's more that her voice became a part of my own thinking. It stitched itself into the way I comfort myself, the way I reason through fear. And there are the memories of her voice at the edges of the day. At night, when she would say goodnight without fail, even if we'd argued earlier. Or in the early morning, when her first words carried the softness of someone who was already thinking about what the day might ask of her. Her voice was always the first bridge between night and day, rest and motion. I remember one evening, sitting at the kitchen table, both of us tired for different reasons. She poured tea into 2 mugs and slid one toward me without a word. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but certain. Not everything has to be solved tonight. Those words, and the way they sounded, have followed me through every chapter of my life since. Her voice was not just sound, it was an atmosphere. It could calm a storm before it broke. It could remind you, without saying it directly, that you were not alone in the room. I think often about how our voices carry more than words. They carry the shape of our hearts, the weight of our days, the echoes of the people who taught us how to speak. In my voice, there is some of my father, some of my friends, but there is most of her. And maybe that's the quiet gift. Even if my children, or the people I love, never meet her in person, they will still know her in some way. They will hear her in my own tone when I speak to them in the calm of the morning, or when I say good night at the end of a hard day. They will hear her patience in my pauses, her steadiness in my reassurances, her warmth in the way I say their names. Voices fade from recordings. Tape wears out, files get lost. But a voice that shapes the way you speak, that's a voice that never really disappears. It becomes part of you, woven into the sentences you will speak for the rest of your life. And sometimes when the world is quiet enough, I still hear her clearly. Not in the room, not in the air, but in the part of me that learned how to speak softly because she spoke softly to me. Number 11. The space she left behind. When someone you love leaves this world, they don't take everything with them. They leave traces, small, unremarkable things that you only notice once you realize they're all you have left. For my mother, the space she left behind was not just in the empty chair at the table or the absence of her footsteps in the hallway. It was in the way the air in the house felt different, as if something warm had quietly slipped out the door and wasn't coming back. I used to think grief was loud, like a cry that echoed through every room. But the truth is, for me, it arrived like a hush. It was the way the morning seemed slower, the way the kettle sounded sharper in the quiet, the way I would reach for my phone to call her and stop halfway through, as though realizing I'd forgotten my own address. Her absence had weight. It sat beside me when I drank my coffee. It followed me through grocery aisles, where I would linger by the brand of tea she used to buy, my fingers grazing the box without putting it in my cart. Not because I didn't want it, but because buying it without her felt wrong, like keeping a seat open for someone who would never arrive. And yet, there was a strange kind of fullness in that space, too. It held the shape of her. I could almost see it. Her hand reaching for the sugar jar, her quiet laugh at something I said, her glance toward the window to check the weather. It was as if her presence had been sewn into the fabric of my memory so tightly that even her absence couldn't unravel it. I think about the way a tree, once removed, still leaves the ground shaped by its roots. The soil remembers. The earth carries the impression long after the trunk is gone. That's how her space feels to me. Empty, yes, but also marked forever by where she stood. There were times I tried to fill that space by keeping busy, by surrounding myself with noise and people and new routines. But the truth is, her space didn't want to be filled. It wanted to be acknowledged. It wanted me to sit in it, to let the quiet settle in my bones, to understand that love doesn't vanish just because the person is no longer here to speak it aloud. Some days, that space feels heavy. I'll catch myself wishing for one more conversation, even a short one. Not to say anything grand, just to ask her what she's cooking for dinner, or to tell her about something small that happened in my day. It's the ordinary things I miss most, the easy moments, the ones that never felt important until they were gone. But other days, that space feels like a gentle reminder. It's a pause in my day that makes me breathe slower. It's the invisible hand on my shoulder telling me to be kind. It's the thought that maybe, in some way I can't explain, she is still here, not in the way she once was, but in the way I carry her forward. I've learned that grief is not a wall you climb over. It's a room you learn to live in. At first, you only see the emptiness, but over time, you begin to notice the light coming through the windows, the familiar scent that lingers in the air, the quiet beauty in the way the space holds your memories. The space my mother left behind is not something I move past. It is something I move with. It walks beside me when I go about my day. It rests near me when I sleep. It's not always sad. Sometimes it feels like the most sacred thing I have, proof that she mattered so deeply that even her absence has shape, texture, and meaning. And maybe that is the quiet miracle of love. It leaves spaces behind that never truly feel empty. Number 12, the things I carry forward. I once believed that the things we inherit are only what can be touched: a piece of jewelry, a recipe written in fading ink, a scarf worn soft at the edges. But now I know the most lasting inheritances are the ones you can't hold in your hands. From my mother, I carry forward a way of moving through the world. She had this gentle gravity about her, an ability to draw people in without ever demanding attention. When she entered a room, she didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it be. She listened first, and when she did speak, her words landed softly, like rain touching dry soil. I notice it in myself now. When a friend is hurting, I find I don't always search for answers. Instead, I try to give them the quiet my mother gave me. A space where nothing needs to be fixed immediately. A space where simply being there is enough. She also taught me small kindnesses. The ones that don't make headlines, but stitch people together in invisible ways. Bringing someone tea before they ask. Remembering how they take their coffee. Noticing when someone's voice carries more weight than usual, and asking if they're all right without pressing for details. I didn't realize how deeply these habits had taken root in me until one day, a friend thanked me for being the calm one. It startled me, because for most of my life, I never thought of myself that way. But my mother was, and it seems that without trying, I have become some quiet echo of her. There are other things I carry forward. her way of finding beauty in what is ordinary. She would stop to admire the pattern of frost on the window before starting her morning chores. She would save the ribbon from a gift, smoothing it between her fingers, because she saw something lovely in the way it curled. Now, I catch myself doing the same, pausing to notice the way the sunlight spills unevenly across the floor, how a bird seems to tilt its head just so, as if it's in on some secret. Even the rhythms of my home bear her imprint. I cook on Sundays, letting the smell of soup drift through the house, because that's what she did. I keep fresh flowers on the table, even when no one is coming over, because she taught me beauty is reason enough. And I've learned to end the day by softening it, turning down the lights, letting music play low, making the evening feel like a gentle landing instead of a sharp stop. But perhaps the most important thing I carry is the way she held her own story. She didn't pretend her life had been easy. She didn't hide her mistakes. When she spoke of the past, she didn't coat it in sweetness, but she also didn't dwell on bitterness. She seemed to understand that life is a patchwork of joy and ache, and both belong. I try to hold my own story that way now, without shame for the rough stitches, without pretending the tears in the fabric aren't there. Because of her, I know that honesty can be soft. It doesn't have to cut. It can simply be the truth, spoken with care. Sometimes I wonder which of these things will continue after me. Which habits, which ways of seeing the world will quietly pass into someone else's life. It feels almost like being part of a secret chain, not bound by blood alone, but by the quiet ways we love, the ways we choose to notice, the ways we refuse to rush what matters. I think of it like planting seeds you may never see bloom. My mother planted them in me. I plant them in others. And somewhere down the line, someone will pause in their own life, look at a shaft of sunlight across the floor, and feel a small, inexplicable peace, not knowing that it began long before they were born. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of it. We don't always need to be remembered by name. Sometimes it's enough to have our way of being live on in someone else's hands, someone else's voice, someone else's quiet moments. I carry my mother forward in these ways, not perfectly, but faithfully. And in doing so, I find that I'm not just holding on to her, I'm letting her continue. 13. The letter I never sent. If I could write to you now, I think I would choose paper instead of a screen. Something real enough to fold, to hold between my hands, to carry in a pocket like a small stone. I would pick a pen that doesn't rush, one that lets the words settle slowly, like snow falling without wind. I imagine beginning with the simplest truth. I miss you. Not in the loud, aching way I used to. Now it's a quieter missing, woven into my days like a thread I don't try to cut. I would tell you that I see you differently now, that the things I once misunderstood are beginning to make sense. How, when I was younger, I thought you were too cautious, too careful with your heart. But now I understand that caution is sometimes love, that it is not about fear, but about holding something precious so it won't be harmed. I would tell you I forgive you for the times you seemed far away, even when you were right there in the room. I didn't know then that you were carrying more than one life's worth of worry, and still finding a way to put dinner on the table. I didn't know how hard it is to love and protect while also tending to your own quiet aches. And I would thank you for the mornings you woke early so my world could be ready before I even opened my eyes. For the nights you stayed awake, waiting for the sound of the door closing behind me, just so you could finally rest knowing I was home. For the way you always saved the better piece of fruit, the warmer blanket, the last piece of bread for someone else. I would admit that sometimes I still talk to you. Not out loud, but in the small pauses of my day. When I'm cooking or walking home or standing in front of the mirror brushing my hair. I ask questions I know you can't answer. And sometimes I imagine what you would say. I would write about the things I'm learning, how I'm trying to be softer with people, because you showed me that gentleness isn't weakness. How I'm trying to find beauty in the middle of mess, because you did that every day without anyone noticing. How I'm learning to forgive myself sooner, because I think you would want that for me. I would tell you about the little ways I see you living in me. The way I hum when I'm folding laundry. The way I keep my tea warm by covering the cup with a plate. The way I run my fingers along the spines of books before choosing one. These are not important things, but they are pieces of you I didn't realize I had kept. I think I would also apologize, not for being imperfect, because I know you never asked me to be, but for the times I held back my gratitude because I thought I had more time. I didn't understand that later is not a promise life always keeps. And maybe I would end my letter simply, not with a goodbye, but with the truth that feels most certain. You are still here, in the way I live, in the way I notice, in the way I love. And because of that, you will never really be gone. If I could, I would fold the letter into thirds, slip it into an envelope, and place it somewhere I know you'd find it, on the kitchen table, beside your tea mug. I'd imagine you reading it in the morning light, pausing at certain sentences, smiling at others, maybe even tucking it away in that little drawer where you kept the things you didn't want to lose. But since I can't send it, I keep it here, in the quiet space between my thoughts. And somehow, I believe you've already read it. 414. The Dream Where You Visit. Last night, I dreamed you came to see me. It wasn't the kind of dream that announces itself, no sudden light, no grand doorway opening. You were simply there, as if you had always been sitting across from me, waiting for me to notice. We were in a kitchen that didn't belong to either of us, but somehow felt like home. The walls were painted a warm, worn cream, and there was a kettle on the stove, its soft hiss filling the air. You were wearing the sweater I remember best, the one with the sleeves you always pushed up when you were about to cook. You didn't speak at first. You just smiled. And your eyes looked exactly as they used to when you were quietly proud of me, but didn't want me to notice too much. I felt the same as I did when I was small, safe without having to understand why. In the dream, I poured us both tea. Mene, I remember my hands shaking slightly, not from nerves, but from the tenderness of the moment, from the way I didn't want to spill a single drop. You wrapped your hands around the mug the same way you always did, as if the warmth could seep into you completely. We talked, but the words weren't important. They were soft, everyday things, about the weather, about how I've been sleeping, about a book I said I wanted to read. And yet, every sentence felt heavier than it sounded, as if beneath each one was another conversation we were too careful to name. At some point, I reached across the table and took your hand. It was warm, the way a hand is after holding a cup of tea. I remember thinking, don't wake up yet. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to stay inside this stillness just a little longer. You didn't say goodbye when the dream began to fade. You just squeezed my hand once, like you were passing something into it. Something I couldn't see, but felt all the same. And then the kitchen light dimmed, and you were gone. When I woke, my hand was resting on my chest, fingers curled gently, as if I were still holding yours. The morning was quiet. The kettle in my own kitchen was still. And yet the warmth remained, a small, steady ember, carried back from a place I can't explain. I don't know if dreams are messages or simply the mind's way of letting us visit what the day keeps too far away. But I know this. I rose that morning with the sense that you had come not to say something, but to simply remind me that we are never entirely apart. 15. The night closes gently. The day has folded in on itself now. Outside my window, the last traces of light have slipped quietly behind the horizon, and the world is wrapped in that tender blue that comes just before true darkness. I sit here in the stillness, letting the quiet settle around me like a blanket. The air is cool and unhurried. Somewhere, far off, a single car passes on an empty road, its sound fading almost as soon as it arrives. The rest is just the hum of the night, steady, soft, as if the earth itself is breathing slow. I think of you, Mother, and all the ways you remain with me. Not in the loud ways the world measures presence, but in the gentler language of memory and habit. The way I stir my tea before sipping. The way I pause to look at the sky before going inside. The way I reach for the softer light in a room, choosing glow over glare. It has taken me years to understand that love does not vanish when the person is gone. It changes form. It becomes the steady rhythm beneath your days, the warmth that returns without asking, the voice that reminds you, quietly, how to be kind to yourself. As the night deepens, I let my eyes grow heavy. I picture you in the kitchen from my dream, the kettle steaming, the chair across from you waiting for me. I imagine that when I finally rest, I will sit there again. No clocks, no goodbyes, just the quiet sharing of a cup of tea. There is no rush to hold on and no fear of letting go. Only the soft truth that we are still connected, woven together by threads that time and distance cannot cut. So I close my eyes now. I let the night gather me in, the way you once gathered me into your arms. And somewhere, in the gentle spaces between waking and sleep, I feel you near. Good night, Mother. I'll see you in the quiet places. And until then, I'll carry you with me, always.